Today we're looking at Quinacridone Violet by Schmincke. Sup friends, Liron here. Thank you for joining me in another episode of The Paint Show, and here I've got Quinacridone Violet by Schmincke. I'm really surprised I still haven't covered this paint because I've been using it so much. And I've been using this one like I use Quinacridone Rose by Daniel Smith. The two are really interchangeable. It's the same pigment. The result is very similar. And it is a tube I've been using mostly as a primary color, just as a red. I would use it with sometimes French ultramarine and another yellow, and sometimes with a cooler yellow like Phthalo, cooler blue, sorry, like Phthalo blue, Cerulean blue, and all sorts of these kinds of paints. I find it super useful. It can produce a pretty large range of values. It doesn't go as dark as some other paints, but it does go pretty dark. You can get very easily strong mid values and also darker ones probably upon two glazes. Okay, so anyway, what I want to do now first is take a look at the Schmincke brochure and just read out the description and look at this paint's stats and info. I'll also show you what it looks like on my palette. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so here's the paint in the Schmincke brochure. We've got Quinacridone Violet. This is a Series 2 paint, okay? 4 out of 5 stars, that's good Lightfastness. It is semi-opaque and semi-staining. The pigment is PV19, okay? That's Quinacridone Violet, exactly like the name of the paint itself. Red violet produced from one organic pigment, so it's a single pigment color. This one, as I mentioned, really almost the same as Daniel Smith's Quinacridone Rose. It is non-granulating, okay, otherwise it would have said it like the G here. It is non-granulating, and this is pretty much what it looks like, okay? So I just wanted to show you some of the description here. Let me prepare some stuff and then we can move on to the actual demo. Okay, so first I just want to show you what the paint looks like on the palette. So here it is, and I'm just gonna wet it a bit and you'll see the real color, okay? And here's the tube, by the way, once again, if you missed it. So I'm gonna show you what it looks like here on the tube, on the palette, and I had to just clear it up a bit and dig a bit, just because I don't care about contaminating my paints and I freely move from one to another. So anyway, and you can see this is a very happy and vibrant and rich kind of violet rose. I love this kind of paint. It really is similar to Daniel Smith's Quinacridone Rose, very similar. So I think now what we can do is just get to demoing, and I'm gonna zoom in on one part here and we'll get started. Okay, so I just started by swatching this side here. And here I'm gonna reserve it to the Daniel Smith. The color is a bit off. Sometimes when I play around with it and do some stuff, it changes. I need to really figure that out. I'll probably get a new camera soon as well. So in any case, now I'm gonna try and charge the bottom part here with lots of paint because I want to show you its darkest version, let's say. Well, as you can see, it doesn't get darker than that. What I will do is show you in the wet and wet some of the lighter possibilities, okay? Because here I just really am showing you a mid value and a dark value. So anyway, we're gonna let that dry, and I think in the meantime we can compare it to Daniel Smith's. So I'm going to use Daniel Smith's Quinacridone Rose here, and you're gonna see they're nearly, I would say, identical. So here's Daniel Smith's. And I'm gonna make it again stronger near the bottom, so you can just see they're almost identical. It's the same pigment. I guess the only differences will account for, I guess, just different processing of the pigment, a little bit of a different composition. It could be an interesting comparison to make, but these are really nearly identical. And I think it's considered a very basic and simple paint that is used for many purposes, and so it's probably pretty much standard, like the French ultramarine. Okay, so anyway, now we can move on to some wet and wet. Okay, so let me pre-wet the paper here. And this will really show you what this paint looks like when it's a little in its lighter variation. So you can see here. Very nice, and it does spread out quite nicely, I would say. I'm just gonna try and leave some lighter areas just for the fun of it. Now come back with a stronger consistency. And if you look at the palette, you'll see how it doesn't get much stronger on the palette as well. So yeah, it's kind of I guess, one of those colors that are very easy to create a mid value with. I mean, there are ones that are much weaker, so it's definitely not that weak. But it is really easy to produce the middle values with it. Unlike, for example, some other colors like, for example, St. Petersburg White Knights, French Ultramarine can get really strong. Just one example. Or some cadmium reds I've been using can get really strong as well. So now I'm going to use as thick a paint as possible, just to put it in there. And I'm going to use that same thick paint for the dry brush in just one moment. So you can see what that looks like. So I think we're gonna let this dry out for a while and just do some dry brush here. And very nice way of bringing out the surface of the paper. Now, one thing I wanted to try out a little differently here, we got a really good one. One thing I want to try a little differently this time is to use the thinner brush. So let me switch to this one. Okay, so I think it could be fun to really try it with the thinner brush. So I'm just grabbing some paint now. I really need to make sure that the consistency is thick. I'll probably need to wipe off some of the paint on the towel or something just to get rid of the water. And I can see I can pretty much already produce because of the flatness of this brush, it's very easy to get that darker value, even if I will probably use just one line, the broken kind of broken lines. So yeah, this is something I use a lot just to get details that I don't want to be too prominent. So yeah, so you can see this the way it looks. Really fun exercise, and if I really use the side of the brush, I can bring out the surface of the paper. Okay, so next up I want us to try some mixes, and we're gonna start with the Cerulean blue hue. I thought about trying two blue mixes and then finally a yellow mix. So let me zoom out just a bit. So for the very first mix we will use again with Cerulean blue hue. So I'm getting some of the blue here. So a cooler blue. And I'm gonna put some of it here. And again, I'm using this very commonly as a primary color, I guess, just to use with other primary colors. So this is one way I'm doing it, and I just thought it would be cool to show you some of the colors I'm using it with for the most part. So there we go. Let it mix a bit on paper, and it creates a very beautiful result. I just want to show you what it looks like when mixed in a more thicker consistency. I think it's better to understand it that way. So we're gonna mix a lot of the two, and this really is almost identical to mixing Daniel Smith Phthalo blue with Quinacridone rose. So it's kind of the same thing. And there we have it. So this is as dark as it gets, and it does get significantly darker than some other mixes. Okay. Next up, I want us to try the French Ultramarine mix. So let's start with the French Ultramarine. I think I'll use the Schmincke one. I also have the St. Petersburg one here, and I love it a lot. So it's softer and easier to pick up. But anyway, we're gonna use Schmincke's for now. So here's some of the French Ultramarine. It's a little more towards the blue than other French Ultramarines that I saw. But anyway, now I'm gonna grab some of the Quinacridone Violet. I'll put it here, and you can see it's a bit of a different mix. This one is a little brighter. Let's try mixing it to a darker consistency here. And you really have to try with the Schmincke French Ultramarine. I'm not sure if it's French Ultramarine or Ultramarine Finest. I will admit I have a bit of a confusion with what's going on here in my palette, but hopefully, I think it should produce a similar result, but correct me if I'm mistaken. So anyway, here we go with a darker mix. And the final result of this is actually pretty similar. So we don't get neutralization in any case here. And lastly, I want us to try it out with some chromium yellow hue. Let me zoom in for this example. So I'm going to start out with the yellow, and I'll clean it up to make sure it's not that contaminated. Here we go, you can see it here, the yellow. So now I've got an area that's pretty clean, so you get a very pure version of it. And I'm gonna add some of the Quinacridone Violet. And a very beautiful and bright combination. Let's try and let these two mix a little more thoroughly. So we get this golden orange, I guess. Among my favorite combinations, really. Again, oranges and reds are what I really, really like. Let's try and push it a little darker. Here's my mixing space, sorry. I'm gonna try and push it a little more. And this is what we get. So a beautiful, beautiful mix. I'm gonna steal some area from the French Ultramarine. I think this is my ultimate favorite mixture here. Let me zoom out so you can see all of the results together from our mixings. Okay, so here we have it, everything together, starting from the swatches, wet and wet, dry brush, and all of the mixes. Again, this is my favorite mix here, probably, just beautiful. And this is a beautiful color that I really enjoyed using so far, and I'll probably get more tubes of this one, more tubes of Daniel Smith's Quinacridone Rose. These are among my favorites, I think, really, and I'm enjoying them a lot, and they're just so practical and so useful in many cases. If you want to do a split primary palette like Patrick Lee Greaves show us that he does, then it's a really good idea as well. Now I want to show you just for a moment here the results with the blues, because I find that interesting. So first off, you can see the granulations of the French Ultramarine here, and the way they mixed is a little different than the way the Cerulean Blue hue mixed, because if you look at the Cerulean Blue, you can really see these stripes of the pigments bleeding into one another. And here it's less obvious, I would say. You can see this also here in the blossoms a bit. But in any case, a really beautiful mixture. Both of these are beautiful, as well as this one. So anyway, this is it. Let's wrap up today's episode. So this is it. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Paint Show, episode 31, and we finally took a look at the Quinacridone Violet by Schmincke. There are quite a lot of more exotic paints I do want to show you in the upcoming episodes. Okay, so I hopefully have a few surprises for you. And this is pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, leave a comment if you have any questions or anything that you want me to cover. I will put more information in the description box and everything we've talked about, just so that you can read it more easily. I'll also put links there to my Patreon page, to my podcast, to my Instagram, and anywhere else where you can find me. Thank you so much, and I will see you again in the next vid.